Hello and welcome to Need to Know, your weekly investment podcast brought to you by the experts at Coutts. I'm Sarah Muir and I'm joined as always by David Broomfield. David, there's only one topic we're going to be talking about this week, isn't there?
There is only one topic that dominates headlines the last 24 hours. It's DeepSeek. We're talking about DeepSeek today.
It's the company we all know about, or we all knew about on Monday, but I'm pretty sure that most of us, certainly not me, had heard about last week.
Well, I mean, social media is littered with people saying, well, I read the white paper and I knew it was coming. But it has taken everyone by surprise, including markets.
It has, yeah. So we're going to be talking about that, but we're going to be talking about it within the realms of the sort of broader topic, which we were going to originally cover, which was tariffs and deregulations. And there's a link there, isn't there?
Well, I think there is. I think that inadvertently, American trade protectionism and geopolitical tensions between the US and China have probably led to the creation of DeepSeek. So we'll get into that as well. And I think obviously we've had the Trump administration having finished their first week in office. I think we can talk a little bit about what that might mean for markets and the outlook.
Okay, but before we get to that, quick fire numbers round. What's your number, David?
Well, I think you're going to guess my number, although I might be wrong. So my number is 560 billion.
Right, okay. Now, I'm guessing that's got something to do with this week's topic, but I'm not going to make myself look a twit and guess wrong. So go on, tell me.
Okay, 560 billion is the biggest single day market cap loss of all time. And that was Nvidia yesterday, exactly. And do you know what's interesting? 8 out of the 10 biggest ever single day losses have also been Nvidia.
Wow.
Which leads me to my second number. And before you red card me and tell me I'm not allowed to.
Okay, go on then.
If you invested $1,000 in Nvidia in 1999, what would it be worth today? The popular answer is which you'll see all over social media, is $4.6 million because it averaged 38% annualized return over the last 26 years. Yeah. However, I don't like those sorts of thought experiments because it relies on sort of perfect hindsight. I prefer a different calculation. That number, that $1,000 number, would actually be worth $4,468 today.
Okay, how do you get to that figure?
Because you had a 76% drawdown in Nvidia stock, so a sell-off. The stock fell 76% during the global financial crisis. Now that's the second big drawdown. In fact, there was a drawdown during the dot-com crash of 85%. Wow. Okay, almost 8 years earlier. So if you had nerves of steel and you held on through the dot-com crash and you held on through the GFC crash, you still had another 57% drawdown in 2018, not that long ago.
Right.
That was the crypto crash. And then again, the list keeps going, 67% drawdown in 2022. So this just illustrates the roller coaster ride of Nvidia. And I would challenge any listener to say, hand on heart, that they were calm and collected during those drawdowns. You would have been stopped out, or you would have sold or reduced your position because they're so extreme. It illustrates that people saying it would be worth $4.6 million today. Yes, although that's technically true, that's not how investors behave. And that's certainly not how you build a diversified equity portfolio.
Exactly. Okay, right. My number is 200.
No idea. Go on.
Okay, 200 is the number of people working at DeepSeek. Now that compares to OpenAI, which employs 3,500 people.
Wow, interesting. That's really good. So you've been getting under the bonnet of DeepSeek as well.
I have been getting under the bonnet of DeepSeek, as I say, which is a company I hadn't heard of until Monday. Okay, so we're going to talk about DeepSeek first of all. So I guess, I mean, there's lots around, I've seen lots in the media about it, but I guess we should, what is it, put it into context, because obviously it's being compared to ChatGPT, sort of generative AI chatbots. What is it? How does it compare? Why is it got tech markets, particularly Nvidia and the sort of Magnificent Seven, so rattled?
Yeah. So let's take it from the top then. So the reason everyone's so rattled really is all about dominance, really. I mean, the AI industry has been evolving in one that it would at least seem would be monopolistic or maybe oligopolistic. So you've got a couple of big players, and size is everything in this game, or at least has been up until yesterday. So DeepSeek's really a threat to the dominance of companies like OpenAI, Anthropic, Midjourney, the big sort of AI engines that some of those sit underneath other big tech firms like Microsoft and Alphabet. And it DeepSeek's really challenging that dominance of massive centralized systems like GPT-4. That's OpenAI's obviously flagship product, and it shows that advanced AI can actually be trained much more efficiently, and that's the emphasis there is on trained, because as I'll come on to in a minute, deploying it still has many of the same issues as big models like GPT. So what makes DeepSeek different is it's used this. It's technically called mixture of experts. Okay, so what this approach does is the AI engine basically selects hundreds of smaller specialized models to collaborate to answer questions. Okay, so just some technical numbers, which I'm going to try and bring to life with an analogy. Okay, there's basically 37 billion parameters in this model active at any moment, and even though the system has 671 billion parameters in total.
Well, no, I was going to say, you finish your point, because I was then going to jump in, because what you're describing is it's slower than ChatGPT, isn't it? I mean, that's the issue a little bit. I mean, maybe it doesn't matter if it's a difference between 3 seconds and 40 seconds. It's not the end of the world, but
yeah. So the point is you have to train these models, and then you have to deploy these models.
Right.
Okay. So your point on it being slow is about the deployment. What I'm talking about initially is just the training. So the architecture that they've built enables this extreme efficiency of memory. It's about 8 times better than ChatGPT and those traditional models. And what that means, just in that training phase, is you can train DeepSeek on 15 trillion words of data for only about $5 million, far below the billions that they spent on ChatGPT. Right. Let me attempt to bring this to life with an analogy. Okay. Because I appreciate not all of us are software engineers or data architects or AI specialists. So think of an AI model like a kitchen. Okay. And the ingredients in the kitchen are basically tokens or data. Okay. So the data is what the kitchen uses to prepare meals. Okay. And DeepSeek has access to 15 trillion different ingredients, far more than ChatGPT's 300 billion. Obviously, GPT-4 has, we estimate, in the trillions. But anyway, the more diverse and abundant the ingredients, the more complex and flavorful the dishes can be. So think of the dishes as the answers. Okay. Now, so you've got the ingredients in the kitchen. Then you've got the kitchen itself. That's the model size. Okay. That's when I talk about parameters. That's the size and complexity of the kitchen. So DeepSeek has got a huge kitchen with 671 billion cooking stations. They're the parameters, but it doesn't use all of those cooking stations at once. It uses mixture of experts, right? So they only put 37 billion of the cooking stations, make them active at any given time, depending on what meal is being prepared. And that's critical here. Now, the chefs, think about the chefs as the raw computational power. They're the GPUs that actually power this thing. So a traditional approach like ChatGPT or GPT-4 would involve all the chefs working on every dish all at once, requiring significant effort and coordination. DeepSeek assigns only a small team of specialized chefs to prepare each dish. So that's where this kind of saving comes from. But it also means that chefs have to spend some time figuring out who in the kitchen is best at completing the task. That's the mixture of experts point. There are other things as well. These chefs that I'm talking about, they use pre-made sources. That's training efficiency. So they actually train the model on outputs from things like GPT. So think of it in this way, that while training the kitchen, so building the model, is efficient, serving the meals to customers, so producing answers, is slower, to your point. So GPT operates like ChatGPT operates like a high-end kitchen where the entire kitchen works together to serve dishes really quickly. DeepSeek, by contrast, spends extra time deciding on all those chefs who to handle the order, and it leads to slower service. So GPT delivers in 3 minutes. DeepSeek, you could take 40 minutes to get your meal. And I think that's crucial, right? Because in those 40 minutes, you've not only got to decide which chefs, but what we've seen from the initial testing of DeepSeek is that it's adding unnecessary garnishes to the dish and flourishes that you didn't ask for. Technically, that's known as verbosity. That creates extra clock cycles. And this is my point that I've talked about on social media, that once you deploy it into a real world environment, It's that bit at the end, not the training, the deployment, that can actually cost potentially just as much, or certainly more than is estimated in terms of power consumption and GPUs.
Well, that was going to be my question, is from a power consumption point of view, because this is a topic we've talked about a lot, is the power demands of AI data centers. How is this as a user of energy compared to sort of what we are more used to with, say, ChatGPT?
Yeah, well, the training is definitely more efficient. You know, we're taking all these things at face value, right? We've got to be a little bit skeptical here. So, okay, China in the past has claimed to have cracked things like ultraviolet lithography, so the actual process that is required for manufacturing semiconductors, and that turned out to be false. You know, and remember as well that, you know, due to the shadow market in trading in these NVIDIA GPUs, they may not have fully disclosed how many GPUs were used to train the model. Yeah. So we have to take all the figures at face value. So I'm just introducing a little bit of skepticism, which is healthy. But your question is valid, that, you know, let's take it at face value. The training appears to be more efficient. The deployment, though, remains to be seen. And if let me dwell on deployment just for 1 second. I think we could use the historical precedent of 5G to make an assumption that Western governments would probably be slightly reluctant into deploying a Chinese AI solution into many businesses. So when we talk about the commercial application and the threat to the dominant AI firms, that has to factor in, I think.
Yeah, because I know some people have been trying out asking questions that are sort of politically sensitive in China, and they're not getting an answer back. So there seems to be a degree of censorship. How important is the fact that DeepSeek is open source, whereas what goes on in the background with things like ChatGPT is very much hidden? It's the secret source, and we don't know. Is that going to help DeepSeek perhaps make more improvements sort of faster than perhaps some of its Western competitors?
I'm not sure about faster, but it does enable the flourishing of a new ecosystem of small, targeted, focused models. And you can see there's a nice application here, not in, you know, where you don't need a giant model and huge amounts of information all processed simultaneously to derive a very accurate answer. If you're looking for a specialized application in a small business or a niche industry, having an open architecture, open source, you know, framework allows people to experiment. And you've seen, like, the CEO of Microsoft yesterday kind of alluding to that point, right? In fact, a lot of commentators out there have been talking about Chevron's paradox, right? That increased efficiency leads to lower costs and actually boosts demand. So if you believe in AI, I think there is a place for both of these different systems to coexist and cohabit. And this news is only positive, right? This means that you've probably got increased uptake, increased engagement, and increased global innovation at both ends. I think this is not, neither of them are right or wrong. They are both right for their specific applications.
It's possibly then going to open up AI and make it available to more people, more perhaps smaller companies that couldn't have afforded to run these huge large language models. It's going to perhaps democratize it a little bit, potentially.
Yeah, and I think the market is coming to that same conclusion dispassionately. Like, follow the money. Look at yesterday, what happened. What started off yesterday as like a broad-based rout of tech actually finished the day much more selective. So if you look at NVIDIA as an example, we had that, 560 billion drawdown in a single, not drawdown, 560 billion sort of drop in market value in a single day. But look at Apple, by contrast, it gained more than about 100 billion over the day. So yes, it's bad for NVIDIA that has an effective monopoly on AI chips. That was the interpretation yesterday. I would say it's more a fly in the ointment. But it's, to your point, the idea that both of these things can be true, and that by having a more efficient, dynamic player in that side of the AI ecosystem, okay, yes, it might. What it means is that you don't have to always be big and always consume huge amounts of NVIDIA GPUs to train AI engines. It means if you have a niche application or a targeted application, you can train it with far fewer chips. So my point is that the focus tends to be on NVIDIA as the sole supplier of those chips. It's not across AI. It's not an existential threat to AI as we know it today.
Yeah. So I guess, well, perhaps that brings us on to our next topic. And obviously NVIDIA was the company that was the most highest profile loser in yesterday's big announcement, or the sort of all this revelation about DeepSeek. And obviously that was because this Chinese hedge fund funded company was forced to find a workaround because they weren't able to get these really advanced NVIDIA chips. So they worked out a way of creating this AI system, DeepSeek, which didn't require the most advanced NVIDIA chips. So it's a little bit of necessity being a mother of invention, I guess. I'm not quite sure that's quite the right metaphor, but you know what I mean? It was like they had to come away with a way of creating this AI sort of AI system without the use of the most advanced NVIDIA chips. And that was as a direct result of sort of restrictions on things that were sold to China.
Yeah, I think that's right. So a quick bit of background on US export restrictions, in this space. So the US very much wants to dominate AI globally. That's been the policy narrative for a couple of years under the Biden administration and more recently under the Trump administration. And as a consequence of that, the US has restricted China's access to these advanced GPUs. These are NVIDIA's A100 and H100 chips. They're the ones that are used in their thousands to train AI technologies. And so you're quite right that DeepSeek responded to those export restrictions. It did it. I mean, this is where the data I think gets interesting. So before the ban, it turns out that DeepSeek actually stockpiled quite a lot of GPUs, enabling the company to train its model, without those sort of resource shortages. And that, I think, fuels a lot of the skepticism that they used as fewer GPUs as they claim. But it has certainly forced AI developers outside of DeepSeek as well to innovate, like you said, with limited resources. So that's kind of the unintended consequences, I think, of those export restrictions. The training methods were specifically created and the architecture was created to work around hardware limitations. So using the software to work around the hardware. So the connection with current Trump era tariffs, I suppose, is that there is certainly this common goal to protect domestic industries in the US and maintain that competitive edge. So I think this will probably add more fuel to that debate over coming weeks and months. And we're obviously waiting for the beginning of February to find out exactly what kind of tariffs come in the US. But I think it's reasonable to assume that some of them will be sectorally targeted. And I think this industry now is burning bright as something that would want to be strategically targeted.
Yeah. I mean, there's lots of speculation about what Trump will introduce, what kind of level of tariffs he'll introduce. I mean, we've already heard talk of 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico from the 1st of February, and lots of figures bandied around about China, particularly if they don't agree to sell some TikTok to a US company. But what does history tell us about them? Because we've talked before about tariffs and are they inflationary or not? What does history tell us about President Trump's last term in office, but also maybe about other US presidents that went down this route? I don't know, somebody like perhaps Reagan or Nixon. What does it tell us about the sort of the impact on the US economy of tariffs?
Yeah, this comes back to the exchange rate again. And we've talked about this over the last couple of weeks. So when Trump toyed with tariffs, well, didn't just toy with them, full scale implemented them in sort of 2018, you saw something interesting happen. You saw the effective tariff rate that US consumers paid be cancelled out by the currency movements. So you saw the US dollar appreciate and the Chinese yuan depreciate. And I think that's interesting because the dollar over recent days and weeks is behaving very closely sort of correlated with tariff rhetoric. Okay. And let's just dwell on that for a moment. Because think about it like this: tariffs reduce the effective demand for foreign goods. If you're in the US, okay, if you're a US citizen, your demand for foreign goods falls. That leads to fewer dollars being exchanged for foreign currencies. That strengthens the dollar relative to other currencies. Herein lies the paradox, because tariffs make foreign goods more expensive, but the stronger dollar can offset this, making foreign goods cheaper, thus limiting tariffs effectiveness. Okay. But we can go further. Stronger dollar impacts American exporters. It makes US goods more expensive for foreign buyers and then reduces export demand. So you see that markets react very strongly, and FX markets at the moment are reacting very strongly to tariff announcements. So when Trump signals protectionism, the dollar typically strengthens. And then when there's a signal there's going to be less tariff action, the dollar weakens. And I think this is the point. It's the uncertainty factor. So the tariff rhetoric drives global investors into the dollar. Remember my point from before Christmas, that uncertainty creates dollar strength, even if that uncertainty is US driven, is US created or US originated. And I think that's actually counterproductive for the administration's goal, or at least stated goal, of a weaker dollar to boost exports. So you've seen all this play out in the dollar, and we talked a lot when we talked about term premia in the bond markets. The uncertainty around this has increased the term premium in bond markets. Listeners can go back and listen to that episode if they want to understand about term premia. I think you're going to see this now play out quite substantially. I think one of our next need to knows will probably be on some of these announcements. We just don't know yet, and that's the uncertainty tax.
Yeah, exactly. I know. I think Jamie Dimon was being quite sanguine about tariffs. He just said they're an economic tool, and he was fairly sort of chilled about it.
Yeah, I think you can be. That's the sort of Michael Pettis approach as well. Unfortunately, the reality of how these are executed is so difficult because trade is so complex.
Yeah,
and having a control system over specific goods or specific sectors tends to have unintended consequences. So you've had some in the Trump administration talking about taxing foreign investments in US assets, right? Because remember, and again, I'm sorry, I'm getting into the economics here. Current account deficits that President Trump has been very focused on, the US has a trade deficit, are also capital account surpluses. Okay, so this strong dollar reflects the volume of capital that flows into US markets.
Right.
And you've had some senior Trump advisors, suggesting we might tax foreign investments in US assets, arguing that foreign capital inflows drive up the dollar's value and contribute to the trade deficit, right? So I think the reason I put that out there is, it's people within the administration, but they're in the fringe of the administration, but it highlights the sort of incoherence of some of the tariff policy goals.
Yeah.
You can't have US global hegemony in capital markets and have a weak dollar at the same time. It just doesn't work.
Yeah. But as we say so often, we just have to wait and see. We've got the 1st of February as sort of one key date that we're going to be watching to see whether these tariffs are imposed on Canada and Mexico. And I think we just have to wait and see what happens with China. There's obviously negotiations going on, and this is part of that negotiation process, is announcements about tariffs. It's all part of that. I think that tactic, isn't it?
I think yeah, it is. And I think the other side of the coin also is deregulation. So you've seen a lot of that over the last week, and that's been focused on the energy sector, which I think is remarkable because the US is the world's largest oil and gas producer. And people might not know this because we don't think of the US as a petro state. It's not. It's a giant, diverse economy. We've spent the first 2/3 of the pod talking about tech. It's not Saudi Arabia, it's not Russia, but it produces 50% more oil than Saudi Arabia as of 23, 24. Texas alone, with an economy the size of Spain, is the world's 3rd largest oil producer. Right. But my point is that President Trump has declared a state of energy emergency. Even though the US is self-sufficient in terms of energy production, the oil price is entirely in line with the average price over the last couple of decades. And the US does occupy a unique position globally. It's got this massive production, high consumption, and limited reliance on imports and exports for energy needs. So I think this vision of energy dominance, I would say, well, it's already there. So we'll have to see how it plays out, as I said. I mean, remember the point that I've made before about EVs. You don't get focused on the sort of moral argument here. The point is that an EV is a cheaper vehicle to make, is a technologically more advanced vehicle, and cheaper to maintain, cheaper to run. Not, irrespective of the subsidies and the tax credits that are traded between EV companies and traditional car companies, it is better technology. So this will potentially slow down some adoption, but it doesn't change the direction of travel, I think.
Yeah. Now, I mean, we've argued whether tariffs are inflationary or deflationary. Energy deregulation, is that going to bring down the price of oil or liquid natural gas?
Yeah, but this is very complex. It's complex because what I've talked about already is aggregate numbers. Look at the size of the US, like mass balance of production. Okay, but it's complicated because refineries and product. So it's not just crude, there's product. Yeah. Okay, so for instance, if you go and look at bilateral trade, America actually imports a lot of crude oil from Canada. And the refineries in the northwest of the US are set up to refine that specific type of crude. Meanwhile, out of the Texan sort of basin, the Permian Basin, they're exporting oil globally. So it is very complex in terms of the effect it might have on price. I think the Canadian tariffs that have been mooted would have an inflationary effect in the short term. But again, it's unclear. It's complex. And if the Trump administration is serious about supporting liquid natural gas exports, as I said last week, that could have the effect of increasing global supply of LNG, driving down global Brent, like floating, like exportable values of gas, but domestically it could actually push it up. So I think we have to rely on the economics here. The economics are pretty resounding that tariffs are a tax on consumers and inflationary. And if you're going to tax unilaterally, so like a tariff on everything, particularly I'm alluding to Canada and Mexico here, that probably is at the extreme of the inflation outcome. Okay, so high inflation outcomes. If you're going to tax very narrow, if you're going to issue tariffs very narrowly, say on imports of washing machines, then the inflationary outcome is probably a lot less. But it's so complex. Global trade is so complex.
Yeah. But also, I mean, going back to the deregulation story, I mean, this is important. America still wants to be the focus for AI in the world, and they're going to need a lot of energy to supply these AI data centers. So they need to strip away as much regulation that stands in the way of that as humanly possible.
Yeah, I mean, AI is playing a big part in marginal demand for energy here through data centers. But the point that when we discussed this April last year, we were so ahead of the curve here, Sarah.
As always.
I think it was April, May last year we discussed this. There has been so little investment in power infrastructure in the US and even Europe since 2010 that even if we didn't see this giant AI boom happening, we would still need to invest in power infrastructure. So, and particularly, and I don't want to go down the rabbit hole here with the wildfires in California. The state of sort of power transmission in certain states in the US is very bad because power transmission cables and substations haven't been invested in for decades and decades and decades. So AI just exacerbates the problem. And your point last week on the number of gas-fired power stations that are going to be produced in the US entirely reflects that policy and the need to fuel, need to create energy for data centers and AI.
Okay. So we're definitely going to be coming back to deregulation and tariffs again as we wait to see announcements made. As far as DeepSeek is concerned, we are not overly worried about it. We see it as perhaps a broadening out of AI, perhaps a democratization of it, and not something that we should be necessarily unduly worried about. And maybe the market reaction has been a little bit overwrought, and actually probably there's going to be a little bit of a recalibration as people sort of go, actually maybe it's not as bad as we think it is. It's not the end of American dominance of this sector?
Yeah, I mean, put that NVIDIA sell-off yesterday into perspective. Remember my other stats, the dot-com sell-off, the global financial crisis, the crypto sell-off in 2022. This is, being down, 17% on the day, the S&P down under 2%. This isn't a cataclysmic event. This is just, I think, like you said, a broadening out now of the story away from just one stock.
Yeah, and obviously we're going to be, as one of the things we're going to be coming up, looking at in an upcoming episode is earnings. There's going to be a lot of focus on earnings in the US, particularly the Mag 7 companies, but also other companies and how much they say they're going to be investing in AI to grow their businesses in the future. So that's definitely a subject we'll be talking about over the coming weeks. Thank you very much, David. A reminder that the views expressed in this podcast are not intended to constitute investment advice, are accurate at the time of recording, and are subject to change. Thank you for listening. Until next time on Need to Know, bye for now.